Picture this, a war between two nations, a top-secret nuclear program buried deep inside a mountain, and then, in the dead of night, a third country just jumps into the fight with an attack they've been planning for over a decade. So today, let's break down the anatomy of that strike, Operation Midnight Hammer. Right here, this is the moment it all began. In the pre-dawn darkness over Iran, the very first bombs of Operation Midnight Hammer started to fall.
And what happened next was just a stunning display of military precision. Over just 25 minutes, a perfectly coordinated assault hit 3 separate nuclear facilities all across the country. It kicked off with these specialized bombs on the toughest target, Fordow, and wrapped up less than half an hour later with a volley of cruise missiles. I mean, think about that. The entire operation was over in the time it takes to watch a TV show.
So this was Operation Midnight Hammer. This was the moment the United States officially and very offensively entered the ongoing Iran-Israel war. A conflict that had only started 9 days earlier had just been completely upended. So what exactly did it take to pull something like this off?
Well, the sheer scale of the force they used is just staggering. This was no small surgical strike. We're talking 7 B-2 stealth bombers flying nonstop from Missouri. Their whole mission? To drop these massive GBU-57 MOPs. And get this, each one weighs 30,000 pounds. And this was the first time they'd ever been used in combat. Then you add in the sub-launched missiles and a support fleet of over 100 aircraft. You start to see the immense power that was unleashed in that single 25-minute window.
So the big question is, how did we get here? Right? An attack like this, it doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It's really the final explosive chapter of years and years of escalating tension, broken deals, and just rising fears on all sides.
You can really see the dominoes falling here. It all starts with that 2015 nuclear deal, the JCPOA, which basically falls apart in 2018. Fast forward to 2025, and the International Atomic Energy Agency, that's the IAEA, reports that Iran is enriching uranium to near weapons-grade levels. That triggers a UN censure, and then, the very next day, Israel launches its own attacks, and the war is on. The stage was pretty much set for the US to get involved.
So the bombs fell. The mission was publicly declared a success. But what did it actually accomplish? This is where the whole story gets incredibly murky, with wildly different claims creating a classic fog of war. Let's start with the official proclamation from the White House, which came just hours after the strike. The message couldn't have been clearer. Completely and totally obliterated. A decisive, historic victory. Case closed. Right? Well, not so fast. Because almost immediately, a totally different story started to emerge from inside the U.S. government itself. The Pentagon's official assessment was that Iran's program was set back by about 2 years. A big deal. But then, a classified report from the Defense Intelligence Agency gets leaked, and this suggests the delay was really only a few months. So which is it? A huge setback for Iran or just a little speed bump? And you know what? It wasn't just an American disagreement. Everybody had a different take. Iran at first was like, oh, the damage was superficial, before later admitting it was significant. Israel said, yeah, the sites were damaged, but the program itself wasn't destroyed. But maybe the most telling assessment came from the neutral watchdog, the IAEA. They confirmed enormous damage and said that almost all sensitive equipment at that key Fordow site was gone. It's just so clear that everyone saw the exact same event through a completely different lens. You just knew an attack of this magnitude was going to send shockwaves all around the globe. And sure enough, the political and diplomatic fallout was immediate, and it was intense. The sequence of events that followed was just dizzying. First, retaliation. Iran fires missiles at a major U.S. airbase in Qatar. But then, and this is a shocker, just a day later, a total reversal. A ceasefire is announced, and both Iran and Israel accept it, ending the war. The final move, though, was one of pure defiance. Iran cut off all cooperation with the UN nuclear inspectors, basically plunging the future of its program right back into darkness. As you'd expect, Iran's official response was pure outrage. They framed the American action as a blatant violation of international law. But America's key ally in the region, Israel, had a totally different view. Prime Minister Netanyahu called the strike a historic turning point, praising what he saw as a bold and really necessary decision. Meanwhile, other major world powers like Russia jumped in, echoing Iran's condemnation. Their foreign ministry called the strikes a gross violation of all kinds of international norms, really highlighting the deep geopolitical divides that this attack just blew wide open.
And you can see this global split really clearly when you look at the numbers. The world was completely fractured. You had about 40% of nations, mostly Western allies, who were supportive of the mission's goal. Then you had another 35%, including Russia and China, who flat out condemned it. And then a quarter of countries, a lot of them in Europe and the Middle East, tried to walk this tightrope in the middle, just urging everybody to calm down and get back to diplomacy. There was absolutely no consensus here.
Okay, so after the ceasefire, once the dust had settled, the most important question of all was still hanging in the air. What did this all mean for the future? What are the real long-term consequences of such a dramatic military strike?
Well, security analysts immediately raised some major concerns. Did the strikes create a wounded tiger? An adversary that's now even more determined to get a nuclear weapon? The general thinking is that Iran will feel this overwhelming need to restore its pride, probably through its network of proxy forces. And that leads to the central debate. Was this a smart act of deterrence, or did it just kick off a much wider, more dangerous conflict? Whatever the answer, the one thing we know for sure is that the trust needed for any future diplomacy is, well, it's pretty much gone.
But amid all this intense geopolitical analysis, one of the most surprising, almost bizarre outcomes was economic. The big fear was that a crisis would erupt, that Iran would close the Strait of Hormuz, a critical oil choke point. But after the strikes and the ceasefire, the strait stayed open, and the average price of gas in the U.S. actually fell to a 4-year low. A major war kicked off in the Middle East, and gas got cheaper. Go figure.
And so all of this leaves us with the ultimate unknown. Operation Midnight Hammer was designed to solve a problem that's been around for decades. But in the end, did this massive show of force actually dismantle Iran's nuclear ambitions for good? Or did it just reinforce their deepest conviction that having a nuclear weapon is the only real way to guarantee their survival? That right there is the fundamental question that's still hanging over everything.